tables. We are ready to begin our panel. So please get back here as soon as you can.
Now, there's going to be a social media question.
Well, then you answer it.
So I'm going to initiate this.
If those of you who are near a doorway can make beckoning signs to those still moving about, that would be really helpful. Loud whistles are fine also. Great. Wow, that did it. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is the part of the day, I think, that you've all been waiting for. I'm Beth Nordbeck from First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ, Wolfboro, and Andover Newton Theological School, and I am really delighted to be moderating this star-studded panel. You may not realize it, but we think this is, in fact, historic, that this is the first time the 6 New England conference ministers have been together in this way, plus our general minister and president. So I am especially grateful to Gary and to our planning committee for having the foresight to think about this months in advance. I want to do 3 things before we actually get into the meat of our event. You have in your packets not only pictures, but full descriptions of the extraordinary gifts and experience of these folk. I'm not going to reiterate any of that, but I am going to call them alphabetically by name and invite them to stand up so you will know who is speaking to us. The Reverend Dr. Jim Antal from Massachusetts. The Reverend Geoffrey Black, our General Minister and President. The Reverend Dr. Lynn Bunyak from Vermont. The Reverend Richard W. Coles Jr. from Maine. The Reverend Barbara Libby from Rhode Island. The Reverend Gary Schulte. And the Reverend Kent Salati from Connecticut. We are so grateful to all of them for taking the time to be with us this afternoon and answer some tough questions. Thank you for asking those tough questions. Here's what we have done and what we're going to do. We've taken your questions that you wrote and put in the box out there. In some instances, we have consolidated questions where there seemed to be commonality. So if you don't recognize exactly your wording, that's probably why. We may or may not get through all the questions. None has been expunged. So if we don't make it through to your question, I do apologize. We obviously have only so much time. Some of these questions are directed toward an individual on our panel, though most of them are directed toward the whole panel. We have no prescribed way in which panel members are going to come forward and answer these things, but I have asked that in most instances, not more than 3 of our panelists respond to any one question, unless it's something about which they feel incredibly passionate, because otherwise we will be here after our time. So here's the first question, and this is, in fact, directed toward the panel. Some people have said that the process of considering resolutions for a conference or at synod is counterproductive because there are inevitably winners and losers. And this is the opposite of collaboration and interdependence. What is your experience and perception about this matter?
So everybody's looking at me and say, we don't want to take this. We don't want to take this. Here's the thing. The biggest mistake is if a resolution stops at the vote. That's always a mistake. If a resolution is about something that matters, the vote is only a beginning in terms of manifesting witness and action.
There's plenty of time if it's that brief.
Okay. I'll try to be that brief, but I'm trying to get this to work. Speaking.
It is on.
Okay, well, I'll try it without.
You want to go up there?
Yeah. Just a word about what has been a growing but very slowly growing movement within the life of the church. I would agree with the questioner that the process that we have on resolutions does produce winners and losers. That's true. It's the best we can do right now. But there are other processes of how should I say, decision making in the life of the church that we may want to begin to look at more and more. It's called spiritual discernment in corporate decision making, which really tries to massage a decision about an issue or a concern such that people at least are all heard and may have input into the ultimate outcome, which would be a how should I say, a resolution that is shared more broadly. So that's something that we've been thinking about, studying about, and even I have some experience when I was a conference minister in New York. We experimented with this mode of decision making, and it had some validity for us. So I would lift that up as one possibility.
So one of the things that I will say is that we have had some discussion in Vermont about how using Robert's Rules of Order often disadvantages particularly our young people and discourages them from being involved in the process. While some of us love Robert's Rules of Order and we know all the little intricacies of it, there are lots of folks who would like to be in leadership but who don't have a lot of patience for that kind of a process. So I do think that there's room for us to look at other models.
I'm looking for excitement as opposed to blank stares. That's my clue. Here's a question specifically.
We know better.
Here's a question specifically for Gary. It was said this morning that Horton Center continues to run at a deficit, but we don't care. You remember this? Can you say a further word about Horton Center financing for the future? And please also indicate why the cell tower revenue is listed as a separate line item.
I see the excitement now. In my homily this morning, I was expressing the feeling and the hope that I have. I'm not sure you own that yet, so I want to make. I just want to bracket that. That was the preacher's voice. You'll have to decide whether you agree with that or not. You know, we have in the last 2 years taken the operating budget of Horton Center and moved it out as a standalone piece. Got that in the back of the packet today for information only. We don't vote on those things as a gathered conference. And so that means the revenues in, pays the summer staff, keeps facilities going, buys the food, and our hope is that that will be revenue neutral, a balanced budget at the end of the day. In the last 2 years so far, that has not happened. And I don't think this year is going to be any different. That said, there are other programs in the conference that help to carry things. The revenues from our 4 revenue streams, our church's wider mission, basic support, that's still the lifeblood. The association dues, that per capita dues that your local church pays, important revenue stream. The Friends of the New Hampshire Conference, about $25,000 a year, comes directly from folks who have experienced what this setting of the church means and contribute. And then our endowment at 4.75% also helps to fill in the revenue stream. That revenue supports the programs of the New Hampshire Conference. It supports the administrative staff at Horton Center. And in the last 3 years, it has supported our relationship with the main conference. We have not asked the program to absorb the $95,800 that we are paying the main conference. Is that sort of clear? I mean, the money's coming in the pool, pay for that management. So what I meant this morning, I still mean. Balance in the Horton Center operation budget is a fantastic goal. But from where I sit, if that doesn't happen in 3 years or 5 years, that's no reason to scrap this program and say, well, we tried it. And I think we need to be in for a longer haul. Now, the cell tower. The cell tower revenue has been a source of conversation ever since we put this present cell tower in place. About 5 years ago, Bill's still around in the room, but I think it's about 5 years ago that the revenue from the cell tower started. Again, we look at this as one conference, one mission, one budget. Just because the cell tower sits on the property at Horton Center doesn't mean that that money is Horton Center's money exclusively. Just as when we have some space for rent in the conference center too, by the way. I'd be glad to take you down this afternoon and show you. But when that space is rented, part of that money is going to go to offset the administrative salaries for Horton Center as well. It's not, I mean, we don't want to give Horton Center the revenue off the cell tower exclusively and say, here you go. It's not enough. We're all in this together. So I hope that responds.
This wasn't directed to me, but I did want to make a comment. Besides the people of the Connecticut Conference, who are our greatest asset, the Silver Lake Conference Center, our outdoor ministry site, is the greatest asset of our conference. And when I arrived, people began talking about the expense of Silver Lake and talking about running a deficit and talking about subsidizing the conference center. Silver Lake is a place where lives are changed. It is a place where people have an encounter with God that can't actually be created in the same way in our local churches. So we have chosen not to use that language any longer about subsidizing. We don't talk that way about the search and call ministry of the conference and subsidizing the work that we do in churches around those issues or any other ministries. So why would we talk about that when it comes to outdoor ministries? It is a place where lives are changed. It's an investment in our future for the church.
The question wasn't directed to me as interim conference minister of Rhode Island either, but I want to testify that I began my ministry by going to an outdoor ministry setting here in Pembroke, New Hampshire, many, many, many years ago. And I'm grateful for that. Rhode Island is also struggling to know what to do with its outdoor ministry setting and how to hold it as a mission of the conference, and we are still working on that. and grateful to find out that Horton Center is thriving and going to be vital into the future. And my hope is that that will be true for Rhode Island as well.
Here's another question for the whole panel. As we have watched other settings of the United Church of Christ consolidate, is it likely that the New England conferences of the UCC will consolidate sooner rather than later? What consolidations specifically are being considered?
Can I answer? I'm not getting into that conversation.
So my colleagues are looking at me. How many of you were in the lunchtime gathering with us? Raise your hands. Okay, so it's a little less than half. Just a quick word that we suggested in there. We recognize we get together on retreat a couple times a year for an overnight retreat, and we've been talking about this kind of thing for many, many years. The entire United Church of Christ has been talking about this sort of thing for many, many years. We have this thing we call our history that's 400 years old, that's pretty tough to drag along there, and innovation is challenging. But here's what I can tell you, that the culture of Northern New England is coming together around New England Schools of Ministry and Northeast School of Ministry, and we might hear more about that from some other question. Southern New England, in 4 weeks, our 3 boards of directors are going to meet together. And this is an unprecedented move in those 400 years of history. What will come of that? None of us know. But once we open with prayer, we will have made history in terms of the importance of what today's focus is all about, interdependence as over against independence. So, watch for further attractions.
Jim, you're the only one who's going to talk to this? Okay.
So I'm a Southern New Englander by birth, but I'm working in Northern New England and have learned all sorts of new things. And one of the things I learned was not 400 years ago, but in Maine, the year 1820. Whenever, you know what I'm talking about, in 1820, Maine was separated from Massachusetts. Forever and ever and ever, amen. They have interesting words for people from Massachusetts in Maine that I'm not going to repeat. But they have them on license plates and things. And so there is that issue. It has nothing to do with theology or ecclesiology. That is a difficulty. And also in Northern New England, there are some geographical things that go, all the valleys and mountains and roads go north and south. So anyway, so that's part of the problem. So we talk about other ways in which we cooperate, such as the Northeastern Schools of Ministry, a consortium of individual programs where we are going to connect with each other. And a vision is that a course is being offered in Buffalo, and we can have a student in Machias, Maine, hook up to it through the internet and take a course, and working toward authorization for licensure in one of our churches that will not only be acknowledged in Maine, but also in New York and the other conferences. It's a wonderful vision. And I think, it's something to work for.
Here is another panel question of a rather different order. The increasing use of social media seems a mixed blessing for church leadership. Please discuss your perspectives on the positive opportunities as well as the challenges, for example, potential boundary violations, inappropriate sharing, and their consequences presented by Facebook, Twitter, etc.
Good question.
So I'm aware that this event is being live streamed. Eric Anderson, who is one of my coworkers in the Connecticut Conference, is helping live stream this event. We have a robust social media ministry in our conference. Eric heads that team up. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. What am I leaving out, Eric? Pinterest, all those things. Yes, we have found that to be a way to connect, a way to get our message out of who we are. We also have a YouTube channel with videos on it as well. So we've embraced social media as a tool, a new tool to get the message of the gospel and the message of what our conference stands for out there. And at the same time, we recognize that there are, as named in the question, there are attendant issues that need to be addressed. So we, as part of our boundary training, include a social media component to that Eric and others also lead to help our clergy be aware of what the issues are around that. But if we are not engaged in social media, we're missing out on a tool that I think we have to be involved in.
Last week, the main conference held its annual meeting in which we voted to totally reorganize and rework our way of governance and staffing and programming. And one of the staffing changes is that we voted to hire a full-time communications director and voted to fund not only that position, but a means by which we can get partially where Connecticut already is. In part, it was driven by our concern to actualize the vision that I just stated for the Northeast School of Ministry, where we can do that live streaming across many states' lines. And so we're very excited about that, and we hope undoubtedly to connect with Eric to get some advice as we move forward with that. And we also do a boundaries awareness training that deals with social media.
I'm going to simply give a brief word of personal testimony. When I became general minister and president, this was beginning to flourish as a way of communicating in the world, really. And at that time, I had a flip phone. Many of you may still have flip phones. The National Youth Event was coming up, and our Minister for Youth and Young Adult Ministries came to me and insisted that I get a smartphone. She had a vision that there would be a Twitter town hall at the meeting, which they did, and it was kind of fun and fabulous. But in addition to that, one of our most recent hires in the national setting was a staff person in our PIC ministry and communications to do social media, and much of our work is being communicated that way as well. And finally, one of my colleagues, Ben Guest, who was once the director of communications for the national setting, when I became general minister and president, said, "Hey, Geoffrey, maybe you should get on Facebook." And I kind of said, "What? You know, I don't know." He said, "No, I think you should do this. You should really do this." And so I did, and I kind of like it. And I'm very indiscriminate. I have about 3,000 friends on Facebook because some of you are out there, and if you want to be one, I befriend everybody. And I've only unfriended one person, so it's pretty good. But just to give you a little tidbit, Mira Tirabassi posted a beautiful, inspiring poem on Facebook just last week. And I would not have, and she's an old friend of mine, and I wouldn't have connected with her that way unless I had been on Facebook to see it and be able to say, "I like it." And I commented. And it was really a wonderful way. And I think it happens over and over again. So social media is here to stay. And I think that it's a vital tool, as has been represented.
I just want to add that I've already tweeted out several tweets of my colleagues up here standing up and talking with you guys as a background. So I'm sure there's thousands of people out there, UCCers and others out there, who are well aware of this great conversation about interdependence going on here in the New Hampshire.
I remember my first email. Is that funny? No, I do. I remember my first email. I don't exactly remember what it said. I think it was something like Watson, come here or something. But I'm a little slow, but I have a Facebook account. And one of the things, we had Keith Anderson and Eric Anderson here 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago talk about ministry in a digital age. And we were encouraged to bring our devices to that. And Keith Anderson, who is a Lutheran pastor who came from Pennsylvania, said, ask a question, ask folks what they are praying for today. And it wasn't anything that occurred to me to do, but the responses that came back from folks who are my friends, and I'm not naive, you know, they're not all your friends. They're Facebook friends. But it was a powerful moment. It was a powerful pastoral moment to see those prayer requests coming in. So I think, as with any tool, we need to decide how to use that judiciously and carefully and appropriately. There are all kinds of horror stories where it's not used that way, but I'm coming along. Coming along.
This is for Jim. Concerning the Andover Newton presidency, what would be the best case scenario if the new president were to have a fitness review for ministry, as would be expected for any clergy?
So I want to begin by saying I'm grateful for that question. And in circumstances like this, we need to be as transparent as is appropriate. Some of you may be aware that I have two roles in relation to this circumstance, that I sit on the Board of Trustees of Andover Newton, and I'm the conference minister in Massachusetts. As soon as this issue came to the attention of the Board of Trustees, I naturally recused myself from further conversation with the Board of Trustees. And for those of you that aren't familiar with our process in this regard, that's of course the appropriate action to do. So I have not been in conversation with the Board of Trustees as they have discerned and then made a decision to retain Martin as president of Andover Newton, and then made some other decisions since then. I've not been part of that decision making. As for the conference side of things, and as for our understanding of his authorization of ministry, what I can tell you and what's appropriate for me to tell you is that the appropriate body in the Massachusetts Conference has this matter under review, and that we in the Massachusetts Conference, I would hope with all of you, are praying for all of the people who have been affected by this circumstance. I think that's it.
And here's one for Kent. As co-chair of the search committee for a new general minister and president, can you tell us both, one, a word about process and timetable, and two, a word about the particular qualities of leadership that you believe are necessary for our next leader after Geoffrey's retirement this spring?
So before I talk about the process, I do want to recognize and in this forum give thanks for Geoffrey Black and his ministry.
Thank you.
The United Church Board has appointed a search committee of 18 members, and we have met by WebEx meeting, and we will be meeting in person next month. The deadline for applications for the general minister and president position is December 1st. We have had people have conversations. There have been lots of conversations in the church about the process. And what we're inviting people to do is to be like Barnabas or Miriam. And if you know someone that you believe has the gifts and skills for this ministry, this important, critical ministry, that you put that into their prayer life and you invite them to pray quickly so that they can get the materials put together to be an applicant for the position. We are not having people come up, we are having people come up to us and say, well, we think X would be a really good general minister and president, and we thank people for that suggestion, and then we ask them to go and speak to X and encourage them to be an applicant. So the process itself, after the close of the deadline of December 1st, the committee will meet and discern together who they would like to speak with next in the next phase of the process. And those will be a series of telephone interviews that will be conducted in the month of January. And then in mid-February, we anticipate having face-to-face conversations with the successful candidates in that part of the process. At the March United Church of Christ board meeting, we will present a candidate to the board, which will then present the candidate to General Synod for election. So that's the process. There is on the United Church of Christ website information about that. My other co-chair, Bernard Wilson, has produced a video that gives some more of the technical details, and you can go to that resource if you have more questions. I'd be happy to answer questions afterwards if you have them. We are looking for a leader. We are looking for a leader who is a person of faith, a person who is theologically articulate and grounded in our tradition. We are looking for someone who is the public face of the United Church of Christ in a variety of settings. So we want someone who is a good communicator. And there's another part of this position that we may not all know about, and that is the part of being an administrator. And so we're looking for someone who understands the complexities of a national system and who understands what administration with ministry to carry out this important moment in the life of the church. We understand the importance of this call that we will offer to an individual. And so we solicit your prayers. We solicit you being like Barnabas and Miriam and putting it on people's hearts as we go through this process.
So now we have a two-part question. I'm going to read it in two parts. The first question really has to do with conference life and the second with congregational life. So I'll read the first question, you can answer it, and then there'll be a follow-up question. With some members of this panel in transition and the overall state of the UCC in transition, what might ensure that the leadership of our New England conferences will continue in cooperation and not move toward separatist concerns?
I'll go first. and you might think that I'm speaking out of turn actually on this matter, but I do think I have something to say about it. I think that we as conference ministers, and I once was one, are called to conferences by the conference and usually its governing body. And I think that the governing body really serves a function of setting direction, setting policy, doing those kinds of things. I think that any of the dynamic around collaboration in the future really has to be owned by the conference governing body and the conference as a whole. If that is the case, then it can be assured that they will call leadership when transition comes. that embraces and embodies that direction. They would probably make that very clear to any candidate that they select for the office to lead the conference, if they are themselves grounded in that direction and feel that that's the appropriate direction for the conference. So I think it really has to do with the work of governance and the work of governing bodies owning this direction as a clear direction for the future of the conference and the conferences together.
Well, I'm one of the other ministers in transition on this dais, and so thought I would answer this question as well. I think we've stated already how, at least in Maine, which is off by itself, we are, you know, we have more of, surrounded by more of Canada than we are the United States, for instance. And so it'd be very easy for us to become separated. There are many parts of the state of the conference that wonder whether or not they are a part of the conference. And those tend to be kind of marginalized. On the other hand, we have had so many positive experiences, mentioned several times today, the cooperative ministries of Maine and the New Hampshire Conference in outdoor ministries has been a wonderful experience for us. And it is taken, it continues in Maine, wondering, well, this is a wonderful progress for you in New Hampshire, but we kind of miss it here in Maine. There are many people that say, is this going to change the way we cooperate with one another? To the point that we are very very clear that it won't change, that it will continue to grow. Our experiences growing into the Northeast School of Ministry are also going to be ways in which we convince ourselves that cooperation is important. Plus, the main conference, my position in the main conference as interim is to prepare the conference for the coming of the next called conference minister. And part of our restructuring has included a job description for the next settled conference minister, which has written into it, as Geoffrey suggests, such cooperation, not only denominationally, but ecumenically, and working toward developing specifically this network, community-based kind of approach to ministry that is not only within state, but beyond state. And just a plug, around February or March, those who might be interested in becoming the conference minister of Maine should look in the National Employment Ministry opportunities, because they hope to have a special conference meeting in, say, April or May to replace me. Amen.
I've been called to the Rhode Island Conference as the interim pastor, and I've only been there about 2.5 months. My hope is that when they called me, they knew that my ministry had all been about being a change agent. And I consider that one of the blessings that God has heaped upon me, as being a change agent. And what that means for me is that I'm trying to be as open as I can to listen to what God has in mind for the future, to wait for the breath of the Holy Spirit to inspire the folks of Rhode Island to figure out where they need to go next. And I don't pretend to know where that will go, but I am grateful to be serving and to be able to help that process move along in Rhode Island.
So I love this question. Some people say I've never heard a question I didn't love, but I love this question because it begins to get at the issue that we are part of a system. So the first thing I want to say about this question, as it applies to New Hampshire, is it is up to the people in this room as to whether or not interdependence will be embraced here in New Hampshire, or, as the question wonders, whether or not here in New Hampshire you will rock backwards into an understanding of independence. So that's the first thing I want to say. Now, I'd love to believe that after 8.5 years of working on interdependence in Massachusetts, that it's like irreversible. You can't turn it around. But there's no guarantee of that, because that long systemic history that is centuries long, it's hard to uproot that into a new vision. But make no bones about it, that's what we are called to do. And so last week, I was at the Connecticut annual meeting. This week, I'm here, and 3 weeks from now, the Rhode Island board, the Connecticut board, and the Massachusetts board will meet together. That is behavior that is unimaginable as recently as 5 years ago, anywhere in our denomination. It remains unimaginable in any other denomination that I am familiar with. Is it irreversible? Is there so much momentum that it's irreversible? I don't know about that, but I go back to my opening point. You have a lot to do with this going forward. System change is all about the grassroots, and that's who you are.
So here comes the second part. What are you hoping will happen if our individual congregations place greater emphasis on the united nature of our covenant with the wider church?
Well, my immediate answer to that is, wow, we could change the world. I mean, to me, that's a very exciting, that's a tremendously exciting thing to dream about and to work toward. I always thought as a local church pastor that if we spent as much time doing our dreaming and doing the work of ministry as we did arguing about the color of the carpet, that we could change the world. So if we all get on that, I just think that's really exciting.
I'd like to follow up on Lynn's comment with some concrete examples. I think that we've tried a couple of things that were very successful, and many of you participated in them. We tried Mission 1 about food justice several years ago. We tried Mission 4-1 Earth. And that was the emphasis on the united for local churches to engage in mission. So one of the things that I see in response to that question is that the impact that we will be able to have in mission, in serving the world, in transforming the world, in seeing justice happen, will be enhanced. That will be enhanced if the emphasis in local churches is more on the united. You get a bigger bang for your buck and your energy when you do it in collaboration and in concert with other congregations throughout the nation. And we've seen the evidence of that. I'm convinced of it.
So the name United Church of Christ was a birth story that we sometimes have amnesia about. It wasn't an easy thing to do, to create the United Church of Christ. You can read the textbooks about it, but what you may not read about is the lawsuit Cadman Church brought and the fear of losing, local autonomy that entered into the equation, and the money that was spent in the fighting and the wrangling behind closed doors that went on. And still, our forebears in the faith had this vision of unity. We don't spend a lot of time talking about unity in our local congregations. We don't spend a lot of time talking about what brings us together, what unites us. And there's a little clue because we have it in our name. We are the United Church of Christ. The unity that we have, we can't like argue and debate it and have a resolution about that. We are called together as brothers and sisters in Christ. And that's where our unity exists. The depth of our unity is that we are united in Christ. It doesn't mean that we are uniform. in what our approach to things, that it means everybody has to be in lockstep with the same thing. That's not what unity is. The unity that we share is a unity that we didn't create. It's a unity that is, as I said last week, a pre-existing condition.
More along the same lines, I was the pastor of the Homer Congregational Church, UCC, in Homer, New York, for just shy of 15 years, from 1986 to 2000. And along the way, in reading through minutes of annual meetings, that church voted in January of 1948 to join the United Church of Christ. Several attempts later, they actually were able to join, and I know when it actually existed. And so another part of what that naming was were we going to be the United Churches of Christ or the United Church? Gary made reference to that in his sermon this morning when he talked about the congregational Christian churches merging with the evangelical and reformed church. And I caught that very distinct comparison. Is anybody a newsletter editor here? Anybody look at the newsletter and bulletin and find typos? Anybody good at doing that? Do you know that so often, in my experience in the United Church of Christ, we live a major typo and are comfortable with it when we don't see that we're actually living out the untied Church of Christ rather than the united Church of Christ. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We laugh when we read the untied Church of Christ, but I think we are much more comfortable living that than what we say our name actually is.
And I would say that the unity we hope for, Christ prays for, is never top down, wherever the top is. It begins in your local church, which I guess is the top, and your neighboring church, whether it's United Church of Christ or some other church. But I want to go to associations for a minute. The New Hampshire Conference had 8 associations when I started, and we have 7 now. The Sullivan Association, in its own good time, said we're too small to carry on those functions, and 2 years ago disbanded and went to other places, and that's working well. I think associations have a real place in the United Church of Christ because they express that local geographic unity. What I find difficult, however, is when associations are just being associations to go through the motion. We got to do something, so what are we going to do now? It may be time to take another look here in New Hampshire anyway. Do we need all 7? I don't know. That's for you to figure out. Do we need all 7? And what's the function? What's the life? What's the vitality? But I still think that's an important part of our unity right there as churches connect one with another and do the work together. So I've opened it up. Have fun with that.
I think this is a good follow-up question to a conversation about unity. In the post-9/11 world, some have observed that the UCC has moved away from its longtime ecumenical commitments and activities and toward an emphasis on interfaith commitments and activities. Is this your experience? How do you see the balance developing between interfaith and ecumenical ministries?
I'll help my colleagues out by starting the conversation. I'm sure they have something to add to this. since I have the honor of being the Chief Ecumenical Officer of the United Church of Christ. That is in my position description. However, what has happened over the last 5 years or so is that the Synod has also moved to have its Council of Ecumenical Relations become the Council of Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations, and to have its officer, the person who works with me on those affairs, become the Minister for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations. This is in keeping with the American reality of today. The nation that we live in, that we serve, is increasingly recognizing the interfaith character of its day-to-day life, as well as its ecumenical reality. And we do both and try to grow in both directions. So many of you in New England may not buy this, but we'll try it. We talked about interfaith, and for us, one of the easiest things to do was to go after what we call the low-hanging fruit. Who do you think we would build a relationship with as an interfaith relationship? The Unitarian Universalists. And that has opened up a lot of good conversation and good relation work, even some possible shared ministry. We've already had a long-standing shared ministry with the Unitarian Universalists in the Our Whole Lives curriculum developed by the United Church of Christ and the UUA. That is ongoing. But we're looking at other things now together, and we certainly share some similar values around justice issues. So on immigration, we have worked very closely with the UUA in being advocates for fair and just immigration policies in the United States. But we go beyond that to look at other possibilities. We have dialogues with Muslim communities, the Jewish community, all of these, and we're beginning to branch out beyond the Abrahamic traditions, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, to begin to think about the growing number of other religious bodies in the country, people who are Buddhists, people who are Hindus, Sikhs, they're all here. And we have a need to really reach out to them and to begin to be in relationship with them, because that's the fabric of America today. So we're not abandoning our ecumenical partnerships. We may be out ahead of many of our ecumenical partners on interfaith issues going beyond the Abrahamic traditions, but we share with them in this concern that we not isolate ourselves as Christians. So I think there's a balance that's being struck on that issue. We're moving in many different directions, but again, our ecumenical partnerships are strong, they are vital. We have not abandoned them in the least, and at the same time, we're growing in interfaith directions.
So I want to answer this a little bit based on my experience in Vermont and see if this rings true for you or not. What we're discovering is that the vitality around both ecumenical and interfaith work has shifted from being on a statewide level to a local level. And so consequently, our ecumenical council is, I think within about 3 weeks, is going to call it quits. And the energy shifted in that organization in two ways. One is we lost our partnership with the Roman Catholic Church over marriage equality. So they pulled out of the ecumenical council when they were on one side and some of us were on a different side. And the other thing that's happened is a shift in terms of our ecumenical council was really good at writing position papers, but not so good at living out a visible, concrete witness in the world. So we find more energy in an organization like Vermont Interfaith Action, which is really sort of a grassroots organization that gathers people not only ecumenically, but also interfaith to work on common issues of justice. For instance, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing an action on a moral economy. And that's where the energy seems to be in local ministeriums and interfaith groups, and then gathering together to do something as a common witness.
This is a different kind of a question. Women no longer feel happily unheard in our churches. Yet the New England Women's Celebration has continued to be important for some in both enriching and connecting women's lives. What future, if any, do you see for this kind of gathering? What are the strengths and/or weaknesses of this kind of gathering?
I'll step in it. I'm leaving in 8 months. What can they do to me? The main conference hosted the last New England Women's meeting in Portland. And Susie Craig, who is just retired as associate conference minister, was involved with the planning. And I was not informed of the meeting of this great event until about 2 weeks beforehand, and not invited to attend until I complained. Because I wanted to support it. And then I was told that the conference office was not interested in supporting it. I'm just laying out to you some of the politics behind this. My mother was named Erna, and she was a Women's Guild person, non-compared. She was, I grew up in the church learning about the Women's Guild and helping out with dinners, mostly getting snacks from the ladies who were preparing the dinners. And so I love women's ministry and know of the great involvement in mission that they do across the world and in local churches. Where would local churches be without them? And so I hope they continue, and I want to be involved in helping that the same.
What? No, I just want to make sure my microphone was on. Excuse me, I got this cold. I can't speak about the region, but I can speak about the New Hampshire Women's Fellowship. You know, they meet at our office, they plan at our office, and I always feel welcome at their meeting. And a couple of years ago, we saw a resurgence in that group. Janet Cole-Morgan and others got involved, and there seems to be a lot of good stuff happening. I was at Ringe for part of the retreat that the group had, and you know, I knew you were meeting at Haverhill, and I could have gone. I would have been welcome. And so the place, the point, my goodness, keep going, keep doing your ministry. It's very important for the whole church.
Here's a question for Jim. I'm going to remind my friend Jim that this is not a workshop.
Amen.
Because this question speaks to something that I have heard Jim speak brilliantly on for many, many, many minutes.
Is the 3-minute timer here?
What have been some of the most effective tools, activities, approaches you have used or are aware of to get clergy and congregations more engaged in care for the environment?
So Beth is right. I could go on and on this one. And so I want to answer the question first, then I'll start going on and on until somebody yanks me. The most effective tools so clergy. I say to my clergy every time I gather my clergy, that they should preach every third or fourth sermon on climate change. How would that go over in New Hampshire? And they look at me like I have forgotten everything I learned in seminary, right? And then I say to them, well and good, but if we don't, in our churches and our clergy, I don't know if it'll be 10 years, it won't be more than 15 years, every single sermon will be on grief. Grief for the world we let go. The church can play the fundamental role. The big green organizations, 350.org, they're all great. They can't do what the church can do. We've shown over 2,000 years exactly what we can do to change the direction of the world and social values. We must get engaged with these issues. Concretely, a church could support a preacher by saying, we want you and support you regularly to preach on this topic and urge us to take action on it. Many of our churches and many of your churches have installed solar panels. Many churches have greened their church buildings. What about testimony in your congregation? How could it be that we would come together every week to pray, and living as we know we are in a dying creation, we don't devote a period of time every worship service when we are communing with God, guess whose creation it is, we don't devote a period of time at every worship service to testify to how my life and your life and your life and your life have actually done something different over the past week in order to help creation, to redeem creation, to revive creation. To me, it's unimaginable and hypocritical that we would continue with our liturgical practices and in this day and age, knowing what we know, not integrate as an essential part of our worship, this kind of testimony and this kind of conversion. Now, there's a lone voice out there clapping someplace, but and I'm accustomed, you know, as my colleagues up here know, I'm accustomed to being a lone voice in this. But I tell you, friends, the debate is over. You know, the debate that was paid for by the Koch brothers is over. And now it's just a question of whether we are going to hand to our grandchildren a creation that is inhabitable or not. And if that's not a concern for the church, I don't know what is.
So while we're on social issues, here's one for the whole panel. It's short, but it is not uncomplex. In what ways can local congregations address the issue of economic inequity, both nationally and globally?
The first thing is to look at in the manual on ministry and what the code is in there in the first section on local church life, in which it says that local churches and then associations and then conferences will pay their staff equitably. And then we go on and do advocacy that some others can talk about even now.
So over the summer, our senator, one of our senators in Vermont, Bernie Sanders, actually called, yes, yay, Bernie! He actually called together the religious leaders in the state and said, what do you have to say about a moral economy? And so we did a joint press conference across Roman Catholic, Episcopal, United Church of Christ, United Methodist, And one of the things that we did in that press conference was to urge all of our congregants to actually take the steps that are going to be necessary, like supporting a livable minimum wage, and making sure that this is an issue that your leaders, your congressional leaders, understand is a #1 priority. So these are, I think that's one very concrete thing that we can do. And I think it also, as unpopular as it is sometimes, I think it's also important to name the sort of super wealth that lives in this nation and which we tolerate, and name it for the sin of greed that it is. And that's not a popular thing, I know. And I've heard from people out of, because this is something I've said out loud, and there are people that disagree with me. And it's not just, the sin of greed is not just for people who are really wealthy, it's for all of us. And asking the question in our own lives, when is enough enough? And how do we live in such a way, as the saying goes, that others can simply live?
This is a question about chaplaincy. As a chaplain, I find many people are wary of churches while still seeking spiritual depth and community. Chaplains are often the face of the church to seekers in hospitals, on college campuses, or in retirement communities. Chaplains are also the outreach to prisons and often the homeless. How might the vision for interdependence that we've been talking about include chaplains as well as local congregations?
I'm an extrovert when I can say I can't stand silence. So one of our hospital chaplains, retired now, asked if he could have permission to include on our conference yearbook that has all the names of various ministers and churches and conference officers and association officers, if he could include a page that detailed the names and the placements of specialized ministries. Because we don't have such a page. Maybe some other conferences do, but we don't. And we said, of course, of course. And so that's one way to include folks, is to name them and to involve them in the conscious life of the conference from day to day as they're going through their annual reports, I think.
In Massachusetts, once a year, I gather in our 5 different regions, geographic regions, for what we call a Day of Covenant. And so I gather with the pastors in there. And about, I don't know, 6 years ago or so, the chaplains started saying, like, the most obvious thing in the world that had never occurred to me, even though I had been a chaplain for many years. And that is, we actually work during the day. And of course, ministers work during the day too. I want to assure all of you that are taking that statement as I did not intend it. But ministers have flexibility in their day in a way that chaplains don't, right? So I've begun having a time of covenant with our chaplains. They are so grateful to come together and to share best practices with each other, and as was just said, and to be acknowledged in this. So I think this is a great question, and I think we have work to do in order to make it more integrated and more, so that our total life of interdependence is more rich as a consequence of that.
So chaplains have to have a local church membership by virtue of their authorization for ministry in the United Church of Christ. And there are some congregations that I'm aware of that embrace those ministries of chaplains by even including them on the back of the bulletin where it says who the members of the staff are, to have the chaplain's name there. So what would it look like for chaplains in local congregations to begin to talk about what ministry in the public square is like? It seems to me we've got those resources, and we don't think even within our local contexts of how the gifts of chaplaincy could be shared in the local community. So I think, like Jim said, there's more work to be done around that.
Here's a relatively technical one for Geoffrey. The pension board has a new pastor program. How is that program being integrated through association, church, and ministry committees?
Okay, the name of the program is, and I had to get it corrected for me, but is the Next Generation Leadership Initiative or Institute. And it is a pension board program that is targeted at reaching younger clergy. So actually that program is reaching out to people who are ordained already and are serving in some UCC setting. So it really doesn't address the question directly, because the people that are in that program, and it's a very robust program. It's in its third year. I think it's reaching has reached almost 100 young clergy people with a very robust 10-year program of leadership development, and we're very excited about it. One of the criteria, though, is that this is a leadership development program for people who are local church pastors and see a career or their future as being local church pastors, strong local church pastor leaders. So I think that it doesn't really address the questioner's point, because the people who are in it and who can apply to it are already authorized and called to serve in various local churches.
There seems to be a good deal of excitement regarding a New England School of Ministry, especially given the recent closing of Bangor Seminary. How might such an enterprise affect existing seminaries, which would include Andover Newton, Harvard, Yale, and Hartford? Are there plans to cooperate or work with any of these schools? And if so, what might they be?
Hi. I don't think that any of the schools of ministry, the Northeast School of Ministry, we really need to include New York in this. So we just can't call it New England. So it's Northeast School of Ministry. Will be any threat of any kind to Harvard or Yale or Andover Newton. So that said, I say that a little bit jokingly, but hopefully we can cooperate with them already. Our model institution is movement is the New York School of Ministry, which has been for a decade in cooperation and done things like summer academies at Lancaster Theological Seminary and also Yale. So that's our plan and part of our model to do this. Next month, we will be hosting in Maine. It goes around to different hosts, the Council for Theological Education of New England, in which we are going to be discussing these things. We are very new in our development, and so we're trying to figure out who we are and what we plan to offer, and so therefore have not had official conversations with any seminary to date. It's because we're not ready to have the conversation. We want to be able to tell these seminaries something that is more definitive before we enter into conversations. But next month we'll begin that discussion at that meeting of the CTENE and Andover Newton representatives, and Bangor of the BTS Center representatives will be present at that meeting.
I don't think the seminaries or the theological schools need to be afraid of the schools of ministry and the consortium that is growing up. New Hampshire has an embryonic school. We have our first student, a lay person who, in reading the weekly news, our weekly e-newsletter, said, I want to sign up for Christian ethics with Steve Johnson. And this is not intended for this person. That's not an ordination track. It's not. This is personal enrichment in terms of background and something deeper in our faith. And so my hope would be that the New Hampshire School of Ministry and this whole consortium not only train people for licensed ministry in local churches, but also to think about that continuing education component for clergy. Some of our committees on church and ministry are actually saying, should we require clergy, in order to maintain their ministerial authorization, to do some continuing education on a 3-year cycle? And that doesn't seem to be too much to me, but you know, but the school would be one of those places where a person could go for continuing education as well as some of the other things. So I don't think the seminaries should be afraid, nor will this supplant their ability to train up ordained leaders and other leaders for the church.
I want to pick up on Gary's comment as well. I think that these programs, two things that happen. Number one, we have a national goal that that the whole United Church of Christ would become more theologically educated and grounded in Scripture and so forth and so on. And these programs, although they're not designed for this purpose, can serve that purpose as someone who wants, any of you who would want to take a course in a particular area, they would be more accessible to you than, say, a seminary might be. And that's a wonderful addition to our tradition of seminary theological education. The other thing that has happened, though, that I've noticed over time is that several people who started out, at least I remember with the New York School of Ministry, they started out going to the New York School of Ministry and were very involved in that program, but eventually came to the realization that they wanted more. And so they end up unintentionally being feeders to the seminaries as well. So that's just a kind of a glimpse of what happens there.
This may just be the last question before the Big Bang question at the very end. Periodically, there have been unsuccessful attempts to schedule General Synod every 4 years or to cut costs by meeting in Cleveland. What's the status of these conversations or other cost-saving ideas being considered? That's probably being lobbed at Geoffrey.
Yes, this is a perennial question to the questioner. This is something that has been on the table on and off for a long time. And actually, I think, what Synod was it where a frequency question was voted down? Maybe 30, yeah. So the Synod has had proposals for changing the frequency of Synod from 2 years to 3 or 4 years, and that has been defeated several times. However, the need for a change in frequency or form of Synod and possibly even amending some of the function of General Synod is still on the table. We actually have an active commission that is working right now on questions of the future of General Synod, and is looking at questions of form and function and frequency. And I'll tell you some things that are on the table just for them that they are looking at. One of them, and maybe this is a test, we can talk about this at some other point, but one of them is to change the frequency. That would, to go to, because from at least from the standpoint of national setting staff, one reason is that we have a much smaller national staff. And by the time you start to working on the resolutions and everything that comes out of a synod, by the time 2 years goes by, you really have only started to get that work done. So the current frequency is maybe too frequent for the size of our national setting and other settings of the church. The other thing that we're looking at is, should we, at this point in the history of the United Church of Christ, move to a different model of synod where every church can send delegates, something akin to the Disciples of Christ model of a y'all come synod, which is what we're looking at that. There may be ways to get at that. And here's one thing that we've looked at is, and part of this is driven by cost, not totally by cost, but part of it is driven by cost. Should we simply charge a registration rate that will cover the cost of General Synod, which would double the cost of the registration fee from where it is now, which is in the mid 200s, to about $500 a person? That's something that people are thinking about. But at any rate, the question is being addressed. We anticipate that any major change in the form or frequency of General Synod will not be felt until 2019. Okay, our current structure would only allow us to get to a decision by 2017, which would be implemented by 2019 or thereafter. So just to give you an idea of how this might move forward. Say, for instance, if this commission finishes its work and makes a recommendation to the Synod in 2015 that requires bylaws changes, they couldn't be enacted till 2017, which means that the first Synod that would be impacted by those changes wouldn't happen until 2019.
So this issue, I think the deepest issue that we ought to be addressing as a church is, why do we meet? What is it that brings us together? Gatherings like this, why is there an annual meeting of the New Hampshire Conference? And my partial answer to that is that it's a moment to celebrate the DNA of who we are. And if we talk about changing the synod, I think the roadblock, because it's come up twice for a vote, and the people whose way has been paid, their airfare, their meals, and their hotel are asked not to go to Long Beach or Tampa or Cleveland or Baltimore. They're voting on putting that experience out of existence. So the catch-22 is that we ask people who are going on behalf of the delegation, whoever they're representing, whose way is paid, do you not want to do this any longer? I'm not sure we'll ever get there if that's the process that we undertake to do that. I am clearly in favor of an y'all-come General Synod, where local churches could have their own delegates and local churches could pay for, it's an economic justice issue, pay for their members to come, which is what the disciples of Christ do. There's a model that's out there that works. And this is, I'm thinking really slowly, Beth, so I'm going to answer the first question because I've been thinking about the resolutions question. And that is, what would it look like for us to do issues assemblies at annual meetings, where the body determined what are the issues we would like to talk about in the next year together? And rather than writing a resolution about that, what if we engaged in a process which named what the body wanted to talk about? So that's my chance to answer the first question really late.
And a good answer it is. Okay. So this is the sort of the big question. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have time for all of you to answer it, but I hope several of you will in the 5 minutes we have left. Do you see something akin to the Reformation happening in the near future in the church? What do you believe the future will look like for our churches, and what transitions will take place in denominations?
You got to think for 5 minutes.
We're all looking at me. So, I've said this before, but this is hard to say with these people sitting behind me. Anybody who is serious about looking at trends, looking at any of the national Protestant national settings of the church will recognize, I don't know if it's 15 years, it's not more than 20, that they will not look anything like what they looked 10 years ago. That said, to answer this question, the possibility for a thriving, progressive church movement in America is huge. It has never been more promising. It will not be top down. It will be and must be bottom up. It will only happen if the people in this room decide that your work of ecumenism and interfaith connectivity to change the world is in fact what Jesus is calling you to. And for you to get engaged with other people in your town, because you don't have to read Bill McKibben to know that the unit of resilience going forward is town by town. It's not denomination by denomination. Let's start there. It's not country by country. That's becoming less and less important as our country, for example, becomes more and more dysfunctional, right? Republicans and Democrats can agree on this one, right? So the unit of resilience, given climate change, which changes the conditions under which we all live, the unit of resilience becomes your town. And guess what? It's a miracle that there's a church in every town. That's a miracle.
Yes, we are in Reformation time. Phyllis Tickle would say we're in the midst of a massive, what's it called? Rummage sale. We all know about rummage sales. We've got one. Do we know what that's going to mean? We may not yet, and that's okay. But we know that if we clear out and open the space, God will direct us.
Well, that is a good amen. I want to thank Gary and the planning team for bringing this event about. I want to thank all of you for asking some fabulous, stimulating, pointed, tough questions. And I want to thank this great panel for taking the time to be with us and really giving us some wonderful food for thought. We did it. We're right on time.
Friends, we're going to move right into the closing worship. You have an announcement? Martel's going to do an announcement. And while he does that, even as this group has gathered together, it's going to begin to scatter back to the corners of the room. And a motion for an adjournment. You want to do that before I talk or now? Page 10 is where you'll find the liturgy for this very simple closing. And as you leave today, you will receive a piece of that wonderful puzzle designed by Rachel Keefe. We're not going to try to put it back together next year, although that could be a lot of fun. but we want you to carry this piece home. Staff will be handing them to you at the door. It's a symbol of the unity that we share. And so take that unity home and cherish it and share it and celebrate it.
On the tables, you will find that there are plants. They are live plants. They need homes. So any male or female that is wearing a warm color, red, pink, orange, something that reminds you of Reformation Sunday.